So today, we're diving into a really different way of looking at trauma and addiction. And this isn't just about a new technique. It's about a whole new story of healing. One that doesn't start in our heads, but actually deep inside our bodies.
Right off the bat, let's just chew on the big question this model forces us to ask. Are things like trauma responses and addictions signs that something's broken? A personal failing? Or could they be something else entirely? Could they be deeply ingrained survival skills that once helped us get through something unbearable?
And this quote from Jan Winhall, who created the model, it nails it. We're being asked to completely reframe these experiences. They're not seen as pathologies, but as adaptive, you could even say heroic, attempts by our own bodies to protect us. Okay, so this reframing, this is our first big idea, telling a completely new story about healing. And it's a huge shift in perspective. It's about moving away from that judgmental question, what's wrong with you, and toward a much more compassionate and curious one, what happened to you? So why do we even need a new story? Well, it's because the old methods, a lot of the time, just hit a brick wall. These top-down cognitive approaches, what we usually think of as talk therapy. They focus on changing our thoughts. But they can fail because trauma isn't just in your mind. It gets stored in the body, which can stay stuck in these old protective patterns, no matter how hard you try to think your way out of it. This new story, on the other hand, tells us that your body's responses, numbing out, dissociating, even addictions, they weren't just random flaws. They were actually intelligent, adaptive strategies your body came up with to survive unbearable situations when you couldn't just get up and leave. It was your body's best shot at keeping you safe. Okay, so to really get how the body pulls this off, we've got to look under the hood, right, at its operating system. And this brings us to the science behind the model, Dr. Stephen Porges' Polyvagal Theory, which gives us this revolutionary new map of our own nervous system.
So what you're seeing here is just how different this new map is. We used to think of our nervous system as this simple two-part thing. You had the gas pedal, which was fight or flight, versus the brake, which was rest and digest. But the polyvagal model shows us it's way more sophisticated. There are actually 3 distinct pathways, and each one has a very specific job to do.
So, how does the body know which pathway to use? Well, it's through a process called neuroception. This is a huge concept. Think of it as your nervous system's built-in surveillance system. It's constantly scanning your environment for clues of safety or danger. And here's the kicker. It happens completely unconsciously, way below the level of your conscious thoughts. Here's a really easy way to picture it. Neuroception is like your body's internal bodyguard. It's on duty 24/7, and its only job is to ask one single question over and over and over. Am I safe? And believe me, the answer to that question changes everything. So depending on what that bodyguard reports back, your whole system shifts into one of these 3 states. Up top, you have the ventral vagal state. This is when you feel safe, you feel connected, calm. If your neuroception picks up a hint of danger, bam! The sympathetic system fires up for mobilization. That's your classic fight or flight. But if the threat feels totally overwhelming and there's no escape, the body pulls out its oldest trick, the dorsal vagal pathway, which leads to shutdown, to collapse.
And that leads us to a really, really important question. What happens when trauma basically short-circuits this system and wires it to stay in defense mode? Well, this is how the body gets trapped in what's called the trauma feedback loop.
Let's walk through this cycle step by step. So a threat is detected, which triggers that high-energy fight-or-flight response. But if you can't escape, the body just slams on the emergency brake. That's the dorsal vagal shutdown. Now this state feels absolutely awful, numb, disconnected, lifeless. To get out of it, the body uses addictive behaviors like a propeller to launch the system out of that shutdown. But it often just throws you right back into the high-energy sympathetic state. And notice what's missing? That safe, social, connected pathway is completely bypassed. And this is where the whole story of addiction gets flipped on its head. It's not seen as a moral failure anymore, but as a state regulation strategy. The addictive behaviors are basically acting as propellers, just like the quote says, to bounce the body between these defensive states. It's a desperate and, a dysfunctional attempt to manage an unbearable internal world when the path to real safety feels blocked off. Okay, so if the body's stuck in this loop, how on earth do you get out? This is where the model brings in another brilliant piece of the puzzle, the felt sense, which was developed by the philosopher and psychologist Eugene Gendlin. And it's all about learning to listen to our body's own wisdom.
So what is this felt sense? Well, it's basically the art of tuning in to what's called
interoception, which is just a fancy word for our awareness of our inner bodily sensations. You know, like a knot in your stomach or a warmth in your chest. It's about taking a pause, turning your attention inward, and just listening for this holistic bodily knowing that exists underneath all our racing thoughts and big emotions.
You can think of it like this. It's the quiet whisper from your body, happening just underneath all the loud shouting of your thoughts. It doesn't scream for attention. It's subtle. It's that vague, unsettled feeling you might get before you can even put a name to why you're feeling anxious. Learning to gently pay attention to that feeling without judging it is the skill that can actually guide us back to healing. And when you learn to just sit with that felt sense, something amazing happens. It's called a felt shift. This is not just a mental aha moment. It's a real physical release of tension. You might feel it as a deep breath you didn't even know you were holding. Gendlin actually called this the motor of change. It's the body's way of signaling that real deep healing is taking place.
All right, let's put all the pieces on the table. The whole path forward in this model is about one thing: rewiring our nervous system for safety and for connection.
So here are the 4 big takeaways, the core ideas for healing. First, our own nervous system is the main source of healing. Second, trauma responses are adaptive survival skills. They're not pathologies. Third, co-regulation, which is just healing in safe connection with other people, is a biological need. It's not a luxury. And finally, learning to connect with our body's own wisdom, that felt sense, that is the doorway to getting free.
And look, if you're still thinking this all sounds a bit out there, check this out. A staggering 80% of all the information that travels along our vagus nerve, which is like the superhighway of our nervous system, it flows from the body up to the brain, not the other way around. Our body is constantly talking to our brain. Healing starts when we finally learn how to listen. So in the end, the message here is just, it's incredibly hopeful and compassionate. It tells us that healing isn't about trying to fix someone who's broken. It's about gently and safely reconnecting with all the parts of ourselves that trauma forced us to disconnect from, just so we could survive. So I want to leave you with this one last question. In a world that's always telling us to think harder, to push through, what if the real way to heal is actually much quieter? What if listening to the wisdom that your body already holds is the way home?